What's on your radar, Krystal?
Well, as we covered here yesterday, progressive insurgent Cori Bush notched a stunning victory over longtime incumbent and Congressional Black Caucus member Lacy Clay Jr. in a St. Louis, Missouri congressional district. So Cori came to prominence during the Ferguson protest over Michael Brown's death. And on top of being an outspoken activist, she's also a mother, a nurse, and a proud member of the working class with all of the struggle that always entails in the United States of America. Lacy Clay and his father, local civil rights leader Lacy Clay Sr., had held this seat for more than 50 years. Clay was a sort of entrenched institution that you would think no one could ever dislodge. But Cori pulled off the seemingly impossible over the doubts of many, including, by the way, quite a few of the Bernie left. AOC notably stayed out of the race, even though she and Cori are personal friends. So after winning, Bush wasted no time making clear what her priorities will be in Washington. Let's take a listen.
Making sure that we bring home a $2,000 a month UBI that's retroactive, that will last for a year. But that $2,000 a month, this is for COVID-19 relief, that $2,000 a month does not mean take money away from social programs that we have right now. We have to put more money into that, but then also a reinvestment in our school system, taking that money that was taken out of the federal education system and put into private prisons, defund that. We need to go and get that money back and put it into our school system.
Now that is exactly what we need in Washington. And it's no accident that Cori has her priorities incredibly straight. She's a nurse and she's a pastor. And she's also one of the millions of Americans with no health insurance, which became extraordinarily relevant during her campaign when she was hospitalized twice for coronavirus. As she told the New York Times, "I'm worried about the bill I'm going to receive. I drove myself to the emergency room, even though I should have taken an ambulance, but I didn't want that bill. And now the bill from the hospital stay, the bill from being admitted, and the doctor's bill, which is all separate." Now, when you haven't just looked down from on high at the working class citizens of this country as some sort of research project, but you're actually living it and breathing it and know what you and your friends and your neighbors are going through to your bones, you don't need a DC consultant or a think tank policy paper to tell you what needs to be done. You've stood at the gas pump wondering if the card was going to work. You have to check the balance before you take the money out of the ATM. Maybe you've had the lights turned off. Maybe you've had your stuff unceremoniously thrown out into the street because you couldn't make your rent or your mortgage. And certainly, you know every day the stress of wondering if something is going to go wrong that will send you off that cliff and that semblance of stability you are clinging to as best you possibly can. Now, people like Cori don't need a study to tell them about that experience. And I have zero doubt that that is a big part of why people in her community believed in her and decided to throw caution to the wind, tossing out an incumbent with seniority in favor of this young upstart. It's no accident that a number of the squad members who were able to pull off these big insurgent victories have working class backgrounds and deep roots in their communities. They get it. It's really not more complicated than that. And I also don't have to tell you that this is a dramatically different profile than the candidates the Democratic establishment normally recruits and slobbers all over. The reasons why are pretty clear. Number one, they put a massive premium on fundraising ability. How do you think it would go for Cori Bush or AOC as a bartender or Jamal Bowman as an educator when the DCCC asked them to scroll through their phone and identify which of their rich friends are going to max out to the campaign? Because that is literally one of the major litmus tests for the DCCC in backing candidates. They have a name for it. They call it Rolodexing. And if you can't quickly identify hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential contributions, then they are not likely to jump in to help you out. But the other reason I think here is more subtle. You might diplomatically call it class bias, or you might bluntly call it snobbery. They want to recruit other candidates who are in their general social set, who look like them, who sound like them, who share the same elite affect and culture. They want someone who can fit seamlessly into the Upper East Side row houses and Hamptons mansions where respectable Democratic candidates go to grovel for money from the rich. This is far from just a Dem Party problem, though, of course, although it is extra obnoxious coming from the supposed party of the people. Look no further than today's Tennessee primary between a Harvard-educated orthopedic surgeon and a private equity executive to see how the GOP is doing on working-class representation. In fact, according to Vox, workers make up half of America and less than 1/10 of U.S. elected officials. The average member of Congress spent less than 2% of his or her entire pre-congressional career doing the kinds of jobs that most Americans go to every day. No one from the working class has gotten into politics and gone on to become a governor or a Supreme Court justice or the president. What's more, while corporatists have gotten more comfortable allowing women and people of color into the ranks of the ascendant elite, assuming that they have the right class status, of course, the number of working class people in politics hasn't budged whatsoever. And so while there's no guarantee that working class people will have better pro-working class politics, it sure seems like the utter lack of representation at all is a major untold part of the story of why our entire system of government is run for the rich, because it is in fact run by the rich. They're just acting as class allies. And yes, throughout history, there have been good class traders who have stood up for the working class, but that's been by far the exception and not the rule. Now, interestingly, Lacy Clay tried to smear Cori for her working class struggles, sending out nasty mailers about her being evicted and owing back taxes. I've seen the same ugly tactics in countless other races with working class candidates. Randy Bryce is one example. The iron worker whose challenge of Paul Ryan may have sent him into early retirement was attacked in a very similar fashion. But guess what? That old play, it's not working anymore. Clay tried hard to paint Cori as an outsider to the district, accusing Justice Democrats of swooping in to target congressional Black Caucus members. But the public saw through that as well. This district had a chance to say, just holding this seat for a long time isn't enough. Just being a CBC member is not enough. We want more than just identity representation. We want one of us, someone who has stood with us, who will stand with us. And Cori Bush, the uninsured, once homeless, mom, activist, nurse, and all-around powerhouse, perfectly fit the bill. And Emily, I wonder what you think of this. I don't think there is anyone else in Congress right now who is quite like Cori Bush, who has quite lived these struggles in the way that Cori Bush has. And that is part of what makes me so excited to see the level of moral clarity that she brings to the table here.
Yeah, you used a really interesting word, which is representation. And that word is used often in a lot of contexts these days, in sort of the culture war context, but it's actually really important. And I'm saying that as a conservative. I actually think one of the big problems with politics is that there is a lack of representation of working class people in government. And, you know, that's kind of an impossible problem to solve because they don't have, you talked about Rolodexing, they don't have the money to even get to the front lines. But I'm curious from your perspective if you, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the obvious parallel here. I'm curious if you expected this to be more than just her. So when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sort of shocked the world and defeated Joe Crowley, did you expect to see more AOCs? And I think, you know, who we're talking about right now actually has better working class credentials than AOC even does. You know, as someone like AOC went to Boston University. And
and having been a mom and been kicked out of her house, all those things.
Right.
Yeah, I think I tweeted yesterday, I always love when I quote my own tweets, that I was feeling this strange sensation. I think I used to call it hope. And part of why is because with Cori Bush, you see, look, with AOC and also with Jamal Bowman, you have people of color who are kicking out old white guys from overwhelmingly blue districts. This is a different model. You know, this is in the heart of the country, first of all, in St. Louis, and then to take out a CBC number purely by saying, look, you haven't been here, you haven't stood with us, you aren't representing us in the way, and actually it's like a policy argument, and I think the fact that she relates on this working class level really makes a big difference too. To me, this is the start of an earthquake, right? This puts a whole lot of people on notice in the Democratic establishment that haven't before. And so not only do I think we'll see more AOCs and more Cori Bushes, but just like we saw in the Tea Party, where Republicans, the ones who were in Congress, kind of took note of what was going on, and that forced them to move their positions and represent their base more effectively. So I think we'll see that dynamic as well. And look, I looked into some of the research, and you're so right to point out the working class representation piece, which there is a complete blind, nobody ever, there's a complete blind spot in this regard. And of course, you're going to have people who are working class who have bad politics. You're going to have people who are rich who have good politics for the working class. But overall, research says that if you have people who have working class roots and background, they are more likely to have policies that benefit the working class, which is simple and kind of obvious, but it's not something that we ever see here, that never gets talked about here. It's never held up as an affirmative value of having like more people who do the types of jobs that like everyone in the country does, rather than this elite wealthy group trying to imagine what the working class might want and mostly staying in the lane of talking to their friends. And we're talking about Andrew Cuomo later and how he's like admitted that he spends all day talking to rich people. Like, that's most
Don't we all?
That is most of Congress. Cori Bush is not going to spend all day talking to a bunch of rich people.
But I think that gets to the actual challenge, which is when these folks get to Washington, is staying true to their roots. And I think there are actually already reasons for people to be concerned about AOC herself and some of those other folks that are already here. So that's, I mean, half the battle is getting here and then not being shaped by Washington, but shaping it yourself.
I completely agree. And we've covered some of that with AOC here, but there's strength in numbers, so it's an encouraging development. All right, we're going to have more Rising for you after this.